The last thing I saw before I walked out of that dining room was Renee smoothing her dress back down, pearl earrings, catching the light, acting like nothing had happened. The last thing I heard was silence. 14 people at that table, and not one of them said a word. But I heard it, from the hallway, the sound of her hand against my daughter's face. 48 hours later, Renee called me crying. She wasn't crying about Cora. She wasn't crying about what she'd done. She was crying because she'd just opened a letter from a law office she didn't recognize, informing her that her lease would not be renewed, and she had 60 days to vacate the premises. She didn't know when she dialed my number that the LLC at the top of that letterhead was mine. She didn't know a lot of things about me. Most of them I'd kept quiet on purpose. Before we go any further, what time is it where you are right now? Drop your time and your country in the comments. I want to know who's up with me for this one. I moved to Atlanta when I was 26 with a duffel bag, a laptop, and $4,300 I'd saved working double shifts at a property management company in Charlotte for 3 years straight. People hear property management and picture someone handing over keys and collecting checks. That wasn't what I did. I read leases. I flagged clauses. I sat in on negotiations between landlords and commercial tenants and watched grown men in expensive suits fold because they hadn't read page 7. I was the youngest person in every room I walked into and the only woman most months. And I learned faster than anyone expected me to because I had no other option. By the time I left Charlotte, and I understood one thing clearly, the people who owned the buildings were never the ones who looked the most important in the room. They were the ones who stayed quiet and let everyone else talk. I carried that with me to Atlanta. I found Derek 8 months after I arrived. We met at a friend's cookout in Decatur. He was standing by the grill arguing about whether brisket needed a dry rub or a wet marinade, and I walked over and told him he was wrong about both. He laughed. That was the first thing I liked about him. He could be told he was wrong without his whole face changing. We dated for 2 years. We got engaged in the spring. And 3 months before our wedding, I closed on my first property, a small commercial unit in a mixed-use building off Peachtree Road, purchased through an LLC I'd spent 4 months setting up quietly, carefully, the way I'd learned to do everything. I didn't hide it from Derek out of distrust. I want to be clear about that. I told him I had investments. I told him I was building something. He nodded the way people nod when they support you without needing the details. Derek was a man who trusted me, which I loved, and who didn't ask follow-up questions, which I sometimes worried about. What I didn't do was sit his family down and explain it. There was no reason to, or so I thought. Renee came into my life the same weekend I met Derek's mother, Paulette. They arrived together at the front door of Derek's apartment, Renee 2 steps ahead, Paulette 1 step behind, and I understood immediately which one of them had decided how the afternoon would go. Renee was 31 then. She had the kind of energy that fills a room before she speaks, not warmth exactly, but presence. She looked me up and down in a way she probably thought was subtle and said, "Derek talks about you constantly. I wanted to see for myself." I smiled. I said it was nice to meet her. She asked what I did. I told her property management. She nodded slowly like she was filing it somewhere unimportant. I noticed the pearl earrings that first afternoon. Small perfectly matched the kind a mother saves up for. She touched the left one when she was thinking, which I came to recognize over the years as a tell she did it right before she said something she'd already decided was true. Paulette was different, quieter. She had Derek's eyes and his way of letting a pause sit without rushing to fill it. I liked her immediately, the way you like someone you sense could become important to you if things went right. Things went right, mostly. Derek and I married in October. The wedding was small 40-people venue in Grant Park, food that actually tasted like something. Paulette cried during the vows. Renee did not, but she gave a toast that was technically complimentary and managed to include the phrase, "Derek has always had unique taste," in a way that made half the room laugh and left me deciding not to decide what she meant. Cora came 2 years later. She was born in February, which I've always thought suited her, a winter baby, who came out acting like she owned the place. 8 pounds, 4 ounces, a full head of hair, and the most serious expression I'd ever seen on a newborn. The nurse said she'd never seen a baby look so unimpressed with arrival. Derek cried. I laughed. Cora stared at the ceiling like she was already making assessments. Paulette drove to the hospital at midnight and sat with us until 3 in the morning, holding Cora in the plastic chair by the window and humming something low and slow I didn't recognize. It was one of the best nights of my life. Renee came the next morning with flowers she'd clearly bought from the hospital gift shop, still in the cellophane price sticker on the bottom, and said Cora had Derek's nose and hopefully his temperament. She said it looking at me. I was 24 hours postpartum. I let it go. I let a lot of things go in those first years. Not because I was weak, and not because I didn't notice. I let them go because I was building my marriage, my business, my daughter's sense of the world. And I had learned a long time ago that not every battle announces itself as the important one. The one that mattered would make itself known. I just didn't expect it to sound like a hand meeting my child's face in a room full of people who looked away. My second property closed when Cora was 18 months old. My third when she started walking. By the time she began kindergarten, I had 4 units in 2 buildings, all under the same LLC, all generating enough monthly income that I could have stopped working my regular job and been fine. I didn't stop. I liked working. I liked the cover of it too, though I wouldn't have said that out loud at the time. Derek knew the business was growing. He celebrated with me when numbers were good, held me on the nights a tenant situation went sideways, asked the right amount of questions without asking too many. We had a good marriage. Not a perfect one. Derek had a blind spot the size of a highway billboard when it came to his sister. And I had a habit of going quiet when I should have spoken. And those 2 things would eventually intersect in a way neither of us predicted. But in the early years before the friction between Renee and me had calcified into something structural, genuinely believed we would all find a way to exist around each other. Cora is the one who made me stop believing that, not because of anything she did, because of what I watched happen to her in rooms where Renee was present. The way my daughter, loud, curious, uncontainable Cora, would start adjusting herself, sitting straighter, speaking softer, reaching for my hand under the table in a way she didn't do anywhere else. A child shouldn't have to make herself smaller to survive a family dinner. I noticed. I filed it. I told myself I was watching, not waiting. But I was waiting. The thing about a crack in a foundation is that it doesn't announce itself. You don't wake up one morning and find the wall split open. You find a hairline, a place where the paint is slightly raised, a door that used to close flush that now requires a half-second of resistance before it catches. You notice it, you file it, you tell yourself it's nothing structural, and then one day the door won't close at all. And you realize the hairline was never nothing. You just chose a comfortable interpretation. Renee's comments about Cora started small. That's what I want you to understand. They started so small that if I had repeated any single one of them out loud to Derek, he would have said I was reading into things. And he would have believed it. That's the particular cruelty of that kind of behavior. It's calibrated to stay just below the threshold of what anyone else will confirm is real. The first one I remember clearly was at Paulette's house. Cora was 3. We were there for Sunday dinner, the kind Paulette made every few weeks. Pot roast cornbread sweet tea in the good glasses. Cora was in the living room playing with a set of plastic animals she'd brought from home, making sound effects under her breath the way she did when she was deep in her own world. A lion. A zebra. She was narrating a whole story to herself, not bothering anyone, not asking for anything. Renee walked through the living room, looked down at Cora, and said, "She's so loud." Cora was practically whispering. I was in the doorway. Renee didn't see me. She said it to no one in particular, the way you state a fact about weather casually without accountability. Then she walked into the kitchen and asked Paulette if she needed help with the rolls. I stood there for a moment. I looked at my daughter, who had paused her story, and was now looking at the lion in her hand with a small, uncertain expression, like she was trying to figure out what she'd done. She was 3 years old. I walked into the living room, sat down on the floor next to her, and said, "Tell me about the lion." Her face opened back up immediately, the way children's faces do when someone gives them permission to be themselves again. She launched into the whole story loud and bright and entirely her own. But I didn't forget what I'd seen. The pause, the uncertainty, the moment my daughter wondered if she was too much. The comments continued. They were never shouted. They were never cruel in ways that left marks you could point to. They arrived wrapped in the language of concern, of standards of what was proper. At Cora's 4th birthday party held at our house with 12 children running through the backyard. She doesn't share well, does she? That'll be a problem in school. Cora had just handed a piece of her own birthday cake to a little girl who'd dropped hers. I had watched it happen from 6 feet away, at Christmas when Cora was 5, reciting the words to a song she'd learned in pre-K with the particular intensity of a child who has practiced very hard. Renee leaned over to Paulette and said just loud enough, "She performs for attention." Paulette said nothing. Derek was getting more eggnog. When Cora was 6 and came downstairs in a dress she'd chosen herself yellow with small white flowers paired with red sneakers, because Cora has always known exactly what she liked. Renee looked at her and said, "That doesn't match, sweetheart. Let Mommy fix it." Then looked at me. "You let her dress herself?" I said yes. I let my daughter dress herself. I said it pleasantly without elaboration, which I could see frustrated Renee more than an argument would have. I talked to Derek about it. Twice. The first time he sighed and said Renee had always been particular, that she was like that with everyone, that she didn't mean anything by it. I asked him what he thought she meant when she called our daughter loud in a room where Cora was barely making sound. He said I might be a little sensitive about Cora because she was mine, and that was natural. I let that sit in the room between us without responding to it. The second time was after the Christmas recital comment. Derek listened more carefully that time, his face doing the thing it does when he's genuinely trying to understand something. He said he'd talk to Renee. He said it the way men say things they mean in the moment and then allow to become complicated by proximity and history. A week later, he told me he'd talked to her. He said she hadn't meant it the way I heard it. I asked what way she had meant it. He didn't have an answer for that, so he said, "She loves Cora." Maybe. But love is not the same as care. And care is not the same as correction. And correction is not the same as respect. Cora started doing something that year I only noticed because I was looking for it. At home in our house, in her room in the backyard, she was herself entirely. Loud and certain and full of opinions about everything from the right way to fold a blanket to which clouds looked most like animals. She talked to the plants. She made up songs about her dinner. She was in every private space completely and wonderfully too much. At Paulette's house, she shrank, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would catalog. But I watched my daughter recalibrate herself at the threshold of her grandmother's front door every single time. The volume dropping, the gestures becoming more careful, the sentences getting shorter, more checked, like she was editing in real time. She was 7 years old, and she had already learned that certain rooms required a smaller version of herself. I watched it happen in slow motion over months, and I felt something in me go from warm to very, very still. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I knew the way you know certain things before you can prove them. That the moment I said something, it would be dismissed. Too sensitive. Reading into things. It's just Renee's way, so I watched. I cataloged. I kept every detail in a part of my mind. I kept organized and undisturbed, the same way I kept my business files clean, current, and ready. I did not know then that I was preparing. I only knew that whatever was coming was going to require me to have remembered everything correctly. I was right about that. The morning of Paulette's birthday dinner, Cora woke up and asked if she could wear her yellow dress. I said yes. I braided her hair in 2 plaits with white beads at the ends because she'd asked for them specifically. She came downstairs and spun in the kitchen and said, "Mama, do I look good?" I told her she looked like herself, which was the best thing anyone could look like. She ate her breakfast with both elbows on the table and didn't notice, and I didn't correct her, and we drove to Paulette's house with the windows down, and a song on the radio that Cora sang wrong in all the right ways. I did not know on that drive what the evening would cost, but something in me knew to look at her in the rear-view mirror and hold the image, her face in the afternoon light, beads clicking when she turned her head. Singing a song she didn't fully know, completely unaware that in a few hours, a woman at a dinner table would decide that my daughter needed to be taught something, and that I would spend the next 48 hours teaching that woman something instead. Paulette's house smelled like it always did on birthday dinners, brown sugar and something savory underneath the particular warmth of an oven that had been running since morning. There were 14 of us. I counted later when I was trying to reconstruct everything in the right order, the way you reconstruct an accident after it's already happened. Paulette at the head of the table, Derek to her left, Cora next to Derek because she always wanted to sit next to her father at big dinners. She said he saved her the best pieces of bread. Renee across from me, 2 seats down, her husband Marcus beside her. The pearl earrings and the bone-straight hair freshly done. I noticed the hair because it was different from 2 weeks prior. I noticed things like that. I always had. The first hour was fine. Paulette was in good spirits, 63 years old, and moving through her own dining room like someone who had earned every inch of it which she had. Derek gave a toast that made her laugh. Marcus refilled everyone's water without being asked, which I'd always liked about him. Cora ate her salad without complaint, which she only does at Paulette's, because Paulette puts candied pecans in it, and Cora considers this a sufficient enough bribe. The conversation moved the way family dinner conversation moves sideways, overlapping occasionally, contradictory. Someone brought up a cousin's new job. Someone else disputed a memory about a Thanksgiving from 11 years ago. Paulette told a story about her own mother that I hadn't heard before, and I leaned in because those stories were the ones I was collecting quietly, storing for Cora to have later. Cora was fine. She was good, actually, sitting up, using her fork correctly, answering when spoken to, in the polite, measured way she'd learned to perform in this particular house. I watched her do it, and felt the familiar ache of it. My daughter performing manners she already had for an audience that had already decided she was deficient. The water glass was the kind Paulette used for special occasions, crystal heavy at the base, the sort that costs more than it looks like it should. Cora had been given one because Paulette insisted everyone use the good glasses on her birthday, including the children. I'd noticed it when we sat down, and thought briefly that it was a lot of glass for an 8-year-old, but Paulette had already placed it. And Cora was already sitting up straighter because of it. And sometimes a child just needs to be trusted with the good things. Renee was talking about her event planning business. She'd opened Renee's Occasions 14 months prior. A small operation, weddings and corporate gatherings. She'd rented a commercial unit in a building off Peachtree Road to use as an office and staging space. She talked about it the way she talked about everything related to herself, with complete confidence in the audience's interest. She had a wedding booked in March, she said. A corporate retreat in the spring. Things were moving. I listened. I said, "That's great, Renee," when there was a pause that seemed to require it. She looked at me with the expression she used when she was deciding whether my response was genuine. Then Cora reached for the breadbasket. Her elbow caught the edge of the water glass. I saw it happen in the quarter second before it did the slow lean, the weight shifting, the crystal tipping. And I was already starting to push my chair back when the glass went over. Not shattering. It didn't shatter. It simply fell sideways, and the water moved in the fast, quiet way water moves, spreading across the tablecloth, reaching the edge closest to Renee, touching the hem of her dress where it met the chair. Cora said, I'm sorry, immediately already reaching for her napkin, the way I'd taught her, face flushing deep with the particular mortification of a child who has broken a rule she didn't mean to break. It happened before I was out of my chair, before Derek could speak, before Paulette could say it was all right, before any of the other 12 people at that table could move or breathe or intervene. Renee's hand came across the corner of the table, not a slap that traveled far. It didn't need to. It was short and precise, the way you'd swat something you'd already decided deserved it. The back of Renee's hand against Cora's left cheek, quick, certain. The sound of it was small in the room, but it landed in my chest like something thrown from a height. Renee said, That's how you teach a child manners. The table went silent. Not the silence of shock exactly, though. That was part of it. It was the silence of a room full of people who had just witnessed something, and were each individually calculating what it would cost them to respond. Cora did not cry immediately. That was the part that broke me open later in the car when I was alone with it. She didn't cry right away. She sat very still, hand coming up slowly to her own face, touching where she'd been hit with the tentative fingers of someone confirming something real. Her eyes found me across the table. I was already standing. I don't remember deciding to stand. I was simply up, and the chair was behind me, and the room was very quiet. I looked at Cora. I said her name once calmly, the way I'd trained myself to speak in moments when everything in me wanted to do the opposite. I said, "Come here, baby." She slid out of her chair. She walked around the table to me. She was holding the napkin she'd grabbed to clean up the water, still holding it, still trying to fix the things she'd broken by accident. Derek said, "Renee." Renee was already smoothing her dress. The child needs to learn to be careful with other people's things. I put my hand on Cora's shoulder, and I turned us both toward the hallway. I picked up my purse from the hook near the front door. I always hung it there, every time first thing. When I arrived, a habit so consistent, I didn't have to think about it. I got Cora's jacket from the closet. I helped her into it, zipping it up to her chin because the evening had gotten cold. Paulette appeared in the hallway. She said my name. There was something in her face that wasn't quite an apology, but wasn't nothing either. A kind of pained recognition, like a woman watching something fall that she could have caught earlier and didn't. I said, "Happy birthday, Paulette." The pot roast was wonderful. I opened the front door. Cora walked through it ahead of me, still holding the napkin beads clicking softly in her plaits. Derek caught up to us at the car. He put his hand on my arm and said, "Isla, wait. Just let me go back in and..." I looked at him. I want to be precise about this because it matters. I did not look at him with anger. I looked at him with something quieter than anger, which he should have understood was more serious. I said, "Get in the car or stay, but we're leaving." He got in the car. We drove the 40 minutes home in almost complete silence. Cora fell asleep in the back seat 20 minutes out, the way children can fall asleep in the middle of disaster, which is one of the small mercies of being 8. Derek looked out the passenger window. I kept my eyes on the road and let my mind go to the only place that felt useful. I thought about the building off Peachtree Road. Unit 4B. Commercial lease 18 months signed 11 months ago. Renewal window opening in 30 days. I thought about the name on that lease. Renee T. Washington DBA Renee's Occasions. I thought about the fact that every document related to that unit ran through my LLC. That the property management company that handled communications was mine. That the renewal, or the absence of one, required only my signature. I thought about all of this very calmly, the way I thought about most important things, and by the time I pulled into our driveway, the outline of what came next was already clear. I carried Cora inside. I took out her beads one by one, because she hated sleeping in them. I pulled the blanket up to her chin. I stood in the doorway of her room for a moment, watching her breathe in the dark. Then I went to my office, opened my laptop, and pulled up the lease file. I looked at the renewal deadline. I looked at the name. I opened a new email to my attorney. The subject line wrote itself. I have never been a woman who makes decisions in the heat of things. That's not restraint I was born with. It's something I built deliberately over years after I understood what heat costs you. When you move from anger, you move imprecisely. You say the thing that feels true in the moment, but isn't the thing you actually need said. You reach for satisfaction instead of outcome, and satisfaction is cheap and temporary, and often leaves you in a worse position than when you started. I learned that at 22 in a property dispute that had nothing to do with family and everything to do with a landlord who thought a young black woman from Charlotte wouldn't know how to read an easement clause. I got angry. I said things. He countered with things. We went back and forth for 6 weeks, and I ended up settling for less than I was owed, because I'd let the emotion of it pull me away from the documentation. I never made that mistake again. So when I sat down at my laptop at 11:47 that night, I was not angry. Or rather, I was angry the way a river is cold in January. The temperature was real and constant and ran all the way through, but the surface was still and the current moved in one direction only. I drafted the email to my attorney in 11 minutes. I read it back twice. I changed 2 words. Then I sent it. Subject, Non-Renewal Unit 4, B. Peachtree Commerce Center, Body. Please prepare the non-renewal notice for the above unit per the terms outlined in Section 7.2 of the existing lease agreement. Tenant to be notified within the standard window. I'll need the formal letter ready to send by end of week. Let me know if you need anything from me to move forward. That was all. No explanation. No backstory, no mention of pearl earrings or a dining room table or the sound of a hand against my daughter's face. My attorney didn't need any of that. The lease was mine. The decision was mine. The reason was mine to keep. I closed the laptop. Derek was already in bed when I came upstairs. He was not asleep, I could tell by the particular quality of stillness he has when he's lying awake waiting to see if I'll start a conversation. We had been married long enough that I knew all his silences the way you know the sounds of a house you've lived in for years, which creak is the third stair, which pipe knocks when the heat comes on, which silence means waiting, and which means withdrawal. This one was waiting. I got ready for bed. I washed my face. I went through the motions of a normal night with the methodical focus of someone who has decided that the most powerful thing she can do right now is sleep. I got into bed. I turned off my lamp. Derek said, "Isla." I said, "I know." He said, "I should have said something." I said, "Yes." A pause, the kind that has weight to it. He said, "I froze. I didn't expect her to." I know you didn't. That doesn't make it okay. No, I said. It doesn't. Another pause. I heard him shift, turning toward me in the dark. "What are you thinking?" he asked. I thought about the email sitting in my sent folder. The attorney who would open it first thing in the morning, with his coffee, scan it, and begin preparing the paperwork without question, because we had worked together for 4 years, and he knew I didn't send instructions I hadn't already decided on. I thought about Renee's voice saying, "That's how you teach a child manners." and the particular smoothness with which she'd returned to her own dress immediately after, as if the matter was concluded. I thought about Cora's hand going to her own face, the napkin still in her fingers. "I'm thinking we should get some sleep," I said. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then, "Okay." He turned his lamp off. I lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling, and felt the anger move through me, slow and clean and purposeful, like weather that knows where it's going. I was asleep by midnight. In the morning, I made Cora's favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with the cheese melted in. Not on top because she had opinions about the order of things, and I respected them. I cut her toast into triangles. I put orange juice in the good cup, the one with the small painted birds on it, because it was a Thursday, and Thursdays didn't need to earn special treatment. She came downstairs in her pajamas, hair loose from sleep, and sat at the kitchen island, and said, "Mama, can we get a dog?" I said we'd think about it. She ate her eggs. She didn't mention the night before. Children process things on their own timeline, and I had learned not to rush Cora's. She would come to it when she was ready, and when she did, I would be there with the right words. I'd been preparing those too. Derek left for work early. He kissed my temple on the way out and held it a half-second longer than usual, which was his way of saying several things he hadn't found the words for yet. The house was quiet after Cora left for school. I poured a second cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my phone and pulled up the property management portal I used to track all 4 units. Unit 4B was current on rent. Renee had never missed a payment, I'll give her that. 11 months of on-time deposits, always within the first 3 days of the month, always the full amount. She was whatever else she was financially disciplined. I looked at the lease terms. Section 7.2, which I knew by memory but read again anyway, because precision matters. Landlord may elect not to renew this agreement by providing written notice no fewer than 30 days prior to the expiration of the current term. Non-renewal requires no cause under the terms of this agreement. No cause required. I didn't need a reason the law would recognize. I had one the law didn't need to know about. I set my phone down and looked out the kitchen window at the backyard. The oak tree Cora had claimed as hers, the one with the low branch she used as a seat when she wanted to think. The bird feeder Derek had put up 2 winters ago that we kept forgetting to refill. The yard was ordinary and quiet and entirely mine, in the way that things are yours when you've chosen them deliberately. I thought about what Renee didn't know. She didn't know I owned the building. The lease had been arranged through the property management company, which ran through the LLC, which was registered under a name that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know to look. Renee had found the unit through a commercial real estate listing, toured it, with an agent signed papers with a property manager who worked for me without knowing I was the owner. It was not a secret I had engineered for this purpose. It was simply how I'd always operated quietly through structure without announcing myself in rooms where announcement would only invite interference. She didn't know I'd already sent the email. She didn't know that by Friday of that week, a letter would be prepared, signed and ready to deliver formal, legal, courteous, and absolute. She didn't know any of this because she had spent 11 months seeing me as Derek's wife, as Cora's mother, as the woman who brought the good potato salad to family dinners and smiled at appropriate intervals and let certain comments pass without visible reaction. She had never thought to look at what was underneath. Most people don't look at what's underneath. That's the thing I've noticed over years of operating this way. People see the surface you present, and they build their entire understanding of you on top of it. They don't ask what you did before you married their brother. They don't wonder what name is on the LLC. They don't imagine that the woman sitting across from them at the birthday dinner has 4 commercial properties, a real estate attorney on retainer, and a sent email in her folder that will quietly rearrange the next chapter of their life. They just see the potato salad. They just see the smile. My phone rang at 2:17 in the afternoon. Renee's name on the screen. I let it ring. Not because I wasn't ready, because I wanted to understand what version of this call she thought she was making before I decided how to receive it. She left a voicemail. I played it once standing in my kitchen with my coffee going cold on the counter. Her voice was measured, almost pleasant. The tone she used when she was choosing her words carefully because she'd pre-decided the conversation's conclusion. She said she was calling to check in. She said she hoped Cora was feeling better, not feeling better from what she didn't specify. She said she knew dinner had ended on an awkward note, and she hoped we could all move past it as a family. Move past it. Not I was wrong. Not I shouldn't have touched her. Not I am calling to apologize to your daughter. Move past it as a family. As if what had happened was a weather event, regrettable, impersonal subject to being moved past by mutual agreement. I deleted the voicemail. I picked up my coffee, finished it cold, and rinsed the cup. My attorney's response had come in at 9:43 that morning. 4 sentences. Confirmation received letter in preparation, anticipated delivery Thursday. Let him know if timeline needed adjustment. I replied, Thursday is fine. I put my phone in my pocket and went to pick up Cora from school. She came out the front doors with her backpack half-zipped and a drawing she'd made in art class that she wanted to show me immediately before we even reached the car, a picture of our family, the 4 of us, though she'd added a dog in the corner that we did not own, rendered in orange crayon with optimistic proportions. She held it up. Do you like it? I looked at the drawing. At the 4 figures she'd made herself tallest, which made me smile, Derek, with an enormous head that was simply how she'd always drawn him. Me with what appeared to be a cape, which I chose to take as a compliment. I love it, I said. She folded it carefully and put it in her backpack like something worth keeping. We drove home. She talked about a boy in her class who had brought a live caterpillar in a jar, and whether it was cruel to keep it there or educational. She had opinions on both sides and presented them with the rigor of someone who had been thinking about it all afternoon. I listened to every word. That evening I made dinner and helped with homework and read 2 chapters of the book we were working through together before bed. I tucked her in and turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment in the dark. She said from under the blanket, Mama, I said, yeah, baby. She said, I didn't mean to spill it. I said, I know you didn't. It was an accident. I know. A pause. The sound of her settling deeper into the pillow. Are you mad at me? I crossed the room and sat on the edge of her bed and put my hand on her back. Not even a little bit, I said. Not even close. She was asleep in 4 minutes. I went back downstairs and sat in the quiet of the kitchen and did not think about Renee's voicemail or Thursday's letter or the 30 days that would follow. I thought about the drawing in Cora's backpack, the cape, the orange dog that didn't exist yet. Then I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed and slept without difficulty the way I always sleep, when I know exactly what I've already set in motion. The letter was delivered on Thursday at 10:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because my attorney's paralegal sent me a confirmation email with the timestamp from the courier service. Certified mail signature required, delivered to the commercial address on record for Renee's Occasions Unit 4, B Peachtree Commerce Center. The signature line came back with Renee's assistant's name, a woman named Britt who had been working for Renee for 3 months, and who I'd never met and felt mildly sorry for. I was in a meeting when the confirmation came in. I read it under the table the way you read things that are important but not urgent, and then I put my phone away and returned my attention to the meeting. I didn't hear from Renee that day. I didn't hear from her Friday either. I thought about what that silence meant. Not worry, I wasn't worried. But I was curious about the shape of it. Renee was not a woman who absorbed bad news quietly. She processed it outward through conversation and phone calls, and the mobilization of whatever audience she could assemble. The silence meant she was either still in shock or she was calculating, and I didn't yet know which. Saturday came and went. I took Cora to her soccer practice. Stood on the sideline in the October cold with a coffee I'd made at home in the travel mug Derek had given me 2 birthdays ago. Cora played with the uncomplicated ferocity she brought to everything physical running, pivoting, calling for the ball with an authority that always made the other parents look twice at an 8-year-old, who already knew how to use her voice on a field even when she was still learning to use it in a dining room. I watched her and thought, she is going to be extraordinary. Not because I'm her mother, though, that too. Because I could see it already in the architecture of who she was, the way she combined loudness and precision, certainty and flexibility. She was going to be the kind of woman who took up exactly the right amount of space in every room she entered. I intended to make sure nothing bent that out of her before she got there. Derek made dinner Saturday night. He was a better weekend cook than I was patient with things that required time comfortable with the waiting that good food asks of you. He made his mother's jollof rice from memory the way Paulette had taught him years ago, and the smell of it in the house was warm and ordinary and good. We ate together, the 3 of us, and the evening was the kind of evening that reminds you why you built the life you built. Cora argued that rice was technically a vegetable. Derek took the opposing position with more investment than the topic warranted. I ate and listened, and felt underneath everything the quiet certainty of a woman who has already made her decisions and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. Renee called Sunday morning at 8:52. Derek was in the shower. Cora was still asleep. I answered on the 3rd ring. She didn't say hello. She said, "I need to talk to you about something." Her voice had a particular texture I hadn't heard from her before, something pulled tight underneath a controlled surface like a wire that had been wound too many times. She was working to sound normal. She was not entirely succeeding. I said, "Good morning, Renee." A pause. She registered the greeting recalibrated. "Good morning. I received a letter this week about my unit at Peachtree Commerce." "Okay," I said. Another pause. She was waiting for me to fill it. I didn't. "It says my lease isn't being renewed. 60 days notice." Her voice moved through the sentence with the careful enunciation of someone reading from a document they've looked at many times since Thursday. "I've been trying to reach the property management company, but they keep redirecting me. I talked to someone named Harris, who said all decisions on that unit go through the ownership, LC, directly, and..." A breath. "Isla, do you know anything about this building?" I sat with that question for a moment. "Why would you ask me that?" I said. "Because Harris gave me a direct line for the LLC owner, and I called it." Her voice shifted, something moving underneath it now, recognition beginning to surface like pressure finding a crack. "And your voicemail picked up." The silence between us was different from the silences that had come before. It had shape and weight. It was the silence of a woman on the other end of a phone, beginning to understand the dimensions of something she had profoundly miscalculated. I said, "Yes, Renee, I own the building." The sound she made was not quite words. It was the sound of a framework dismantling. "You." She stopped, started again. "Since when?" "Since before I married your brother." Another long pause. I heard her breathing change shallower, faster, the breath of someone whose body has registered something the mind is still catching up to. Why didn't you?" "I don't discuss my business holdings with family," I said. Which was true and also wasn't the entire answer, and we both understood that. "Isla." Her voice tightened into something I recognized the registers she used when she was preparing to assert authority she wasn't sure she still had. "You cannot be serious. My business is in that building. I have a wedding booked in March. I have a corporate retreat." "I'm aware of your bookings," I said. "The non-renewal gives you 60 days. That's the standard window per your lease agreement section 7.2. You'll have time to make arrangements. Make arrangements. She repeated it the way you repeat something that doesn't fit the shape of your mouth. You want me to find a new commercial space in 60 days during peak booking season because... She stopped herself. When she continued, her voice had dropped lower, harder. Is this about dinner? I said, you'll want to start looking soon. Good units go fast. Isla, is this about Cora? I didn't answer that question. I didn't need to. The answer was self-evident, and we both knew it, and I was not going to hand her the dignity of a confirmation she could use as leverage later. I said, I'll have Harris follow up with any administrative questions about the transition. He's very thorough. Don't do this. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, the first fracture in the controlled surface. Don't. I have been building this for over a year. I have clients. I have 60 days as the legal notice period, I said. I've honored the full requirement. You're punishing me. I'm exercising my property rights. A long silence. Long enough that I checked the screen to confirm the call was still connected. When Renee spoke again, her voice had moved into a different register, something cold and deliberate. The tone she used when she decided to stop appealing and start threatening. I'm going to call Derek. That's your right, I said. I'm going to tell him what you're doing. You can tell him whatever you'd like. He's not going to be okay with this, Isla. He's going to be... Renee. I said her name once quietly, the way I'd said Cora's name in that dining room, not raising my voice, not dropping it, just placing it precisely where it needed to land. Your lease expires in 60 days. I wish you the best with your business. I ended the call. I set the phone on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment in the Sunday morning quiet. The coffee maker had finished its cycle. Outside the kitchen window, the oak tree was losing its leaves in the slow, certain way it did every October, a few at a time without drama. Derek came downstairs 20 minutes later, hair still damp in the old Morehouse sweatshirt he wore on weekend mornings. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter and looked at me with the expression that meant he was about to say something he'd been organizing in the shower. He said, Renee called me. I figured she would. She's upset. He wrapped both hands around his mug. She said something about your building and her lease. He said it carefully, the way you say something you haven't fully assembled yet. Yes, I said. She rents a commercial unit from me. I'm not renewing the lease. Derek went very still. The kind of still that isn't calm. It's the stillness of a man trying to process two things at once and not having enough room for both. You own her building, he said. I own the building her unit is in, yes. Since before we were married. You knew I had investment properties. I didn't know. He stopped, set his mug down. Does she know why? I looked at him. He looked back at me, and something in his face shifted, a slow recognition, the kind that arrives not as a surprise, but as a confirmation of something you'd already known and hadn't wanted to name. Isla, he said. Quieter now. She put her hand on our daughter, Derek, in front of 14 people. And then she called me 3 days later to tell me to move past it. He was quiet. You froze, I said. I understand that, but I didn't. He picked up his mug, put it down again without drinking, looked at the window, looked at me. The morning was doing the thing mornings do, moving forward, regardless of what anyone in the room had decided. She's going to say you're using your business to retaliate. She can say that. Isla. Derek. I said his name the same way I'd said Renee's. Not a warning, a placement. Your sister hit our child at your mother's table in front of your family, and not one person at that table said a word. I let that sit. I said 2 words. I said Cora's name and I took her home. Everything after that has been me operating within my legal rights as a property owner. He stood there with his hands around a mug of coffee that was getting cold. He was not a man without conscience. That was one of the things I loved about him, the thing that made this harder. He could feel the shape of both truths at once. His sister had done something wrong, and his wife had responded with something that was technically legal, but was also unmistakably a reckoning. He said, "What do you want me to do?" I thought about it, actually considered it because he deserved that. "I want you to let me handle this," I said. "And I want you to understand that I am handling it the way I handle everything, carefully and completely." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. It wasn't agreement exactly. It was the nod of a man who understood that the ground had shifted and that arguing about the direction wasn't going to move it back. He picked up his coffee and went to sit at the kitchen table and opened the newspaper, the actual paper, the Sunday edition he still subscribed to, because his father had, and the habit had outlasted the man. I refilled my cup. From upstairs, we heard Cora wake up, the particular thump of her feet hitting the floor, the padding sound of her crossing her room, the creak of the second-to-top stair that she always forgot to avoid. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas hair, enormous from sleep wearing one sock. She said, "Is there eggs?" Derek said, "There can be eggs." She climbed into her chair at the kitchen table and pulled her knees to her chest and said, "I want them with the cheese inside, not on top." "I know how you take your eggs," Derek said. She grinned at him. I stood at the counter and watched my husband crack eggs into a bowl for my daughter on a Sunday morning and felt underneath the current of everything in motion, something simple and clear. I was not done. Renee had called Derek, which I had expected. Derek had come downstairs and asked his careful question, which I had expected. He had nodded and retreated to the newspaper, which I had expected. What came next, I had also expected. I just had to let it arrive on its own timeline. By Monday morning, I knew Renee would have made 3 more calls to Paulette, to Marcus's mother, possibly to a mutual cousin, who functioned as the family's informal information network. She would frame the story from her position, which was the only position she knew how to frame things from. She would describe what I was doing as an attack. She would not describe what she had done as an attack. That asymmetry would matter later. I was counting on it. I poured my coffee and watched Cora eat her eggs, and thought about Renee sitting somewhere in her house on a Sunday morning with a letter she hadn't expected, and a phone call that had confirmed things she hadn't imagined, trying to figure out who to call next, what angle to work, how to make a room full of people see her as the injured party. She was good at that. She had been doing it her whole life. But she had never tried to do it to me before, and she had never done it after touching my child. Those 2 facts combined had activated something in me that was not anger and not revenge, and not anything as simple as either of those words. It was correction. The kind that takes its time. The kind that doesn't need an audience. The kind that is already done before the other person understands it has begun. Cora asked for more toast. I made it. The call I'd been waiting for came on a Tuesday, not from Renee. From a number I didn't recognize, Atlanta area code, unfamiliar sequence. I let it go to voicemail, listened to the message standing in the parking garage beneath my office building, my keys in my hand, and the engine still running. A man's voice. Professional, slightly formal, the cadence of someone accustomed to delivering news in neutral tones. He introduced himself as a commercial real estate broker named Philip Chen. He said he was calling on behalf of a client. He didn't name Renee directly, but he didn't need to, who was currently in negotiations regarding a commercial lease at Peachtree Commerce Center. He said his client had encountered some communication difficulties reaching the property ownership, and wondered if I might be available for a brief conversation to discuss the situation. He left his number twice. slowly, both times. I sat in the parking garage and thought about Philip Chen for a moment. He was doing his job. His client had hired him to find a door that looked closed and locate the hinges. I didn't hold it against him. I called him back the following morning. He was pleasant. He had the practiced warmth of a broker who understood that most negotiations lived or died in the first 3 minutes of a phone call. He said his client was very invested in the Peachtree location and was hoping to understand whether there was any flexibility in the ownership's decision regarding renewal. I said I appreciated him reaching out. He said his client was prepared to discuss a rate increase if that was a factor. I said the non-renewal was not financially motivated. A pause on his end. The pause of a professional recalibrating in real time. Would the ownership be open to understanding what might make renewal possible? My client is very committed to finding a path forward. I thought about how to answer that honestly without answering it at all. I said, the notice has been issued per the lease terms. The decision is final at this time. I wish your client well in finding a new space. Given your expertise, I'm sure you'll help her find something suitable. He thanked me politely. We ended the call. I put my phone down and went back to work. What I did not tell Philip Chen, what I had not told anyone, was that the decision was not actually irreversible. I had not closed the door entirely. I had closed it in a way that looked permanent from the outside, while leaving on the inside a hinge so small and so deliberately placed that only I knew it was there. The outcome I wanted was not Renee's financial destruction. That was never the goal. Her business failing would not give Cora back the moment at that table. It would not ungrow the habit of self-reduction my daughter had been building over years of dinners in rooms where Renee had opinions about how much space an 8-year-old deserved to occupy. What I wanted was specific. I had known what it was since the night I sent the email, though I hadn't articulated it even to myself until I sat in that parking garage listening to Philip Chen's voicemail and felt the shape of it clearly. I wanted Renee to understand what she had done, not to feel bad about it in the abstract way people feel bad about things when they're suffering consequences. They'd prefer not to be suffering, not to be sorry she'd been caught or sorry the fallout was inconvenient. I wanted her to understand it the way you understand something, when it costs you, when the cost is real enough, and specific enough that you can't perform understanding from a safe distance. You have to actually arrive at it. The path I'd set in motion was creating the conditions for that arrival. I was not interested in rushing it. On Wednesday, Paulette called me. I had been expecting this call too, though I hadn't known exactly when it would come, or which version of Paulette would be on the other end of it. There were, I had learned over 8 years, at least 3 versions of my mother-in-law. The warm, private one, who sat with me in hospital rooms and told stories about her mother. The family-facing one who managed everyone's feelings with practiced diplomacy. And the one who emerged when something had gone wrong enough that she felt she needed to weigh in directly, which was rare, and which, when it happened, came without the diplomacy. The one who called on Wednesday was the third. She said, "Isla, I need to talk to you about Renee." I said, "Okay, Paulette." "She's very upset." "I know." A pause. "She told me about the lease." I figured she would. She said, Paulette stopped, chose her words, started again. "She said you didn't warn her, that she found out through a letter." "That's correct. That's the standard notification process per the lease agreement." Another pause, longer. "Is this because of dinner?" I said, "How is she otherwise, Paulette?" The question landed the way I'd intended it to, not as deflection exactly, but as a reframe. An invitation to notice what we were actually talking about, which was not a lease. Paulette was quiet for long enough that I could hear the small ambient sounds of her kitchen, the refrigerator hum the faint tick of the clock above her stove, the particular acoustic of a room I had sat in many times. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Something had come out of it, the diplomat layer, the family manager register. She said, "I should have said something at the table." I didn't respond immediately. I let that stay where she'd put it. "I saw it happen," she said. "I saw her hand move, and I didn't." A pause. "I don't have an explanation for that, Isla. I've been thinking about it since that night, and I don't have an explanation." "I know," I said. And I did. I understood the particular paralysis of being in a room with someone you love, doing something you know is wrong, the half-second, where the mind races ahead to all the consequences of intervention. And something in you hesitates. And then the moment has passed, and you're on the other side of it, carrying the weight of what you didn't do. I understood it. I didn't excuse it. Those were two different things. "She's my daughter," Paulette said. "But Cora is my granddaughter. And what happened was..." She stopped. "It was wrong. I want you to know I know that." "Thank you, Paulette. I'm not calling to defend her. I want to be clear about that." A breath. "I'm calling because I'm worried. About the family. About where this goes from here." I said, "Where it goes from here depends on Renee." Paulette received that. She didn't push back on it, which told me she understood what I meant and why. We talked for a few more minutes about other things, Cora's sakura recipe. Paulette had been trying a purely ordinary conversation that existed alongside the heavier one we'd just had without canceling it. When we said goodbye, it was warm and genuine, and left me feeling something I hadn't expected, and a kind of sad gratitude for a woman who had the capacity to be honest about her failures, even the ones that were too late to prevent. Thursday, Renee tried a different approach. She stopped calling me directly. She called Derek instead twice in one day, the second call lasting 47 minutes, which I knew because Derek came home that evening with a particular expression of a man who has been in the middle of something for most of the afternoon. He didn't tell me what was said. I didn't ask. I had a reasonable sense of the architecture Renee would have begun with the injury she felt, moved to the unfairness of the situation, appealed to Derek's sense of family loyalty, and eventually arrived at the request, which would have been some version of "talk to your wife." Derek sat with it overnight. He was good at that, letting things settle before he moved on them. It was one of the things I appreciated about him, even when it frustrated me. Friday morning, before Cora was up, he said, "She wants to meet with you." I was making coffee. "I know. Not to argue. She said she wants to..." He chose the word carefully. "Understand." I turned to look at him. "Do you believe that..." He thought about it with genuine effort, which was all I'd ever asked of him. "I think she believes it," he said finally. "I think she's scared enough right now that she might actually mean it." Fear was not the same as understanding, but it was sometimes the precondition for it. "Tell her she can come Sunday," I said. "In the morning, before you take Cora to the park." Derek nodded. He looked at me with the expression he used when he was trying to read something in my face he couldn't quite access. Not distrust, but the careful attention of a man who had been married long enough to know that his wife operated in dimensions he didn't always have full visibility into. "Isla," he said. "What's your plan here?" I handed him his coffee. "To finish it," I said. He took the mug, looked at me for another moment. Then he went to get ready for work. The rest of that week moved normally. Cora went to school, came home, did her homework at the kitchen island with her shoes off and the TV on low the way she liked it, in complete defiance of every expert opinion about study environments, and produced correct answers anyway because she was Cora, and the conventional conditions didn't apply to her. I worked. Derek worked. We had dinner together 3 nights out of 5. Saturday, Cora had soccer again and scored a goal that she described for the entire drive home, with a level of tactical detail that suggested she had been replaying it in her head since the moment it happened. Saturday evening, I sat at my desk for an hour after everyone was in bed. I opened the lease file. I looked at the renewal terms. I looked at what a 12-month extension would look like. The rate adjustment, I would apply the conditions under which I would or wouldn't sign it. I wrote nothing down. I closed the file. I thought about what my attorney had said when I'd first set up the LLC years ago in a conversation about long-term strategy. The advantage of structured ownership is that you control the terms, not just the financial terms. All of them. All of them. I turned off the desk lamp and went to bed. Sunday morning, I was up at 7. Coffee made by 7:15. The house quiet. Narek still asleep. Cora still in the sprawled, motionless sleep of a child who has spent the previous day running. At 8:51, Renee's car pulled into the driveway. I watched it from the kitchen window. She sat in the car for almost 2 minutes before she got out. I had not expected that the sitting. It was the first sign that something in her had genuinely shifted, that she was arriving somewhere that cost her something to arrive at. She got out of the car. She was wearing clothes I'd never seen her in before. Not the structured, careful outfits she wore to family gatherings, but something simpler. Dark slacks, a plain blouse. No jewelry except the pearl earrings, which I noted she had still kept. She walked to the front door. She stood there for a moment before she knocked. I let her stand there just long enough. Not to be cruel, I genuinely spent those seconds making sure I was the version of myself I wanted to be for this conversation. Still, clear, in possession of every fact, every feeling, every decision I had already made. Then I went to the door and I opened it. She looked at me across the threshold. I said, "Come in, Renee. I'll make coffee." Her face moved through several things at once. Relief, wariness, something that might have been the beginning of shame. She stepped inside. I make coffee the same way every time. This matters because it is a ritual, and rituals have a function beyond the thing they produce. They set pace. They establish who is in control of the room's rhythm. When you make coffee for someone in your own kitchen, you determine how long it takes, which is to say you determine how long they have to stand in your space before anything begins. I took my time. Renee stood near the kitchen island. She didn't sit. I hadn't offered a seat yet. And she wasn't the kind of woman to take one without permission in someone else's house, which was one of the very few things about her I had always respected. She set her purse on the counter with the careful placement of someone trying not to take up too much space, and I noticed it because Renee had never, in my experience, tried to take up less space in any room in her life. The coffee maker finished. I poured 2 cups. I set hers on the island in front of the stool closest to her, and then I picked up my own cup and sat down across from her, and I said, "Sit down, Renee." She sat. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The kitchen held the particular quiet of a Sunday morning in a house where children are still asleep. That specific texture of peace that exists only in the gap between when adults wake and when the day officially begins. I let the quiet sit. I had found over years of negotiations that mattered with contractors, with tenants, with attorneys representing people who believed they had more leverage than they did. That silence was the most efficient diagnostic tool available. What a person does with a silence tells you more about their actual position than anything they'd planned to say going into the room. Renee looked at her coffee. She wrapped both hands around the mug, which I recognized as Derek's gesture, the family resemblance showing up in the small physical habits neither of them would have noticed in themselves. She said, "I've been trying to figure out what to say since Derek called me Thursday." I didn't respond. "I've written it down a few times," she said. "What I wanted to how I wanted to explain." She stopped, looked up at me. Every version sounded like an excuse. "Most explanations do," I said. She absorbed that, nodded slightly like someone confirming a diagnosis they'd already suspected. "I want to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to know I'm not saying it to make you feel sorry for me. I'm saying it because I think it's the only honest place to start." She took a breath. My mother used to do that. What I did, not often. But when we were loud, when we spilled something, when we embarrassed her in front of people, her hand would move before she'd thought about it. It was just how correction worked in our house. Quick, physical, then over. I looked at her. "I know that's not an excuse," she said. "I know Cora isn't my child. I know it wasn't my place. I know." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. I've been telling myself for 8 years that I didn't turn out like that. That I had looked at how I was raised and made choices about what I would carry forward and what I would leave behind. She looked down at the mug. And then my hand moved and the room went quiet. And I looked at Cora's face and She stopped again. Something was happening in her expression that I had never seen there before. Not in 8 years of Sunday dinners and birthday parties and Christmas toasts and all the accumulated occasions of a family that had never quite gotten comfortable with itself. The controlled surface was still mostly intact, but underneath it, something was moving that she couldn't entirely govern. And she knew I could see it, and she wasn't trying to cover it. "I saw my mother," she said, "in what I just did. And I didn't know what to do with that, so I smoothed my dress, and then you were up, and Cora was walking toward you, and Derek said my name, and I just..." She shook her head. I smoothed my dress. The kitchen was very quiet. I had prepared for several versions of this conversation. I had prepared for Renee to arrive defensive to frame the non-renewal as disproportionate to appeal to my sense of family obligation or Derek's position in the middle. I had prepared for her to be strategic, to deploy just enough vulnerability to create the appearance of accountability without the substance of it. I had not fully prepared for this, not because I hadn't known somewhere that this was possible, but because knowing something is possible and watching it arrive in your kitchen on a Sunday morning are two different experiences. I set my coffee down. I said, "What you did affected Cora in ways you don't have full visibility into." She looked at me. "Not just that night," I said. "Before that night. For a long time before that night." I said it evenly without accusation in my voice, because I didn't need accusation. I had facts. "My daughter has been making herself smaller in rooms where you're present since she was 4 years old. I have watched it happen for 4 years. The volume adjustments, the careful sentences, the way she reaches for my hand under the table in your mother's house and nowhere else." Renee's face changed. "She's 8 years old," I said. "She should not have to perform a smaller version of herself to survive a family dinner. And she has been doing it for 4 years because she learned somewhere along the way that her natural size was a problem in those rooms." Renee said nothing, but her hands tightened around the mug. "That is what I'm talking about," I said. "Not just the hand. The hand was the most visible part of something that has been happening for a long time." A long silence. "I didn't." Renee stopped, started again. "I didn't think of it as..." Another stop. "I thought I was helping. With the manners, with the..." She exhaled. "I thought someone had to." "Someone had to what?" She looked up. "Prepare her for how the world is going to treat her." A loud black girl who doesn't know her place in a room. "Cora knows exactly her place in a room," I said. "Her place is whatever space she decides to take up. That's what I'm raising her to know. That's not always safe, Isla. I know that." My voice stayed level. "I know exactly how the world is going to look at my daughter and what it's going to ask her to make herself into. I have been thinking about that since the moment she was born. What she is going to face and what she is going to need to be able to withstand it." I looked at Renee steadily. What she is going to need is to know in her bones that she is not too much, that her voice belongs where she puts it, that the people who are supposed to love her are not going to be the ones who teach her she needs to shrink. I paused. She gets enough of that from the world. She doesn't need it at a birthday dinner. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Renee looked at the counter. She looked at her coffee. She looked at her own hands, which had gone still around the mug. When she looked up at me, her eyes were wet. Not spilling. She wasn't the kind of woman who let things spill if she could stop them, but wet. The kind of wet that happens when something that has been held at a distance suddenly arrives at the correct range. I was doing what she did, Renee said quietly. I was doing what my mother did to me, and I was calling it preparation. I looked at her. I let that sit in the room because it was true, and she had found it herself, and that mattered. Yes, I said. Another silence, shorter this time. What do you need from me? Renee said. I mean that genuinely. I'm not asking as a negotiation. I'm asking because I don't know how to fix what I did, and I think you probably do. I had thought about this moment, about what I would ask for when it arrived. I had thought about it in the parking garage on the day I listened to Philip Chen's voicemail. On the Saturday morning, I sat at my desk with the lease file open and closed it without writing anything down. In the moments before Renee knocked on my door and stood on the porch finding the courage to use her hand, I had known the answer for a while. I said, I want you to apologize to Cora. Renee nodded slightly like someone expecting this. Not to me, I said. Not to Derek. Not to Paulette. Not at a family dinner, not in a group setting, where the apology is also a performance for everyone else in the room. I looked at her directly. To Cora, directly. One conversation, just the two of you. No Derek in the room, no audience. You sit down at her level, and you tell her what you did was wrong. In words she can understand and keep. Renee was quiet for a moment. What if she doesn't want to hear it? She asked. Then you don't push. You ask if she's willing. If she says no, you tell her you'll be ready when she is, and then you leave it alone. Her terms, her timeline. Renee nodded. Okay. And Renee. I waited until she was looking directly at me. If you sit down across from my daughter, and what comes out is another version of preparation, if it's about teaching her something, or explaining why you did what you did, in a way that's really about managing your own discomfort, she will know. She's 8, not oblivious. She'll know, and I'll know. And that will be the last conversation you have in my house. The words landed without drama. They didn't need drama. They were simply true. I understand, Renee said. She meant it. I could hear the difference between Renee meaning something and Renee performing meaning. This was the former, and it had cost her something to arrive at it. And that cost was the thing that made it real. I picked up my coffee. The lease, Renee said. It wasn't a question exactly. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a woman acknowledging a thing that was still present in the room. We'll talk about the lease after, I said. She nodded. She understood what after meant. She understood that the sequencing was intentional. The lease was not leverage. I wanted her to know that, even if I couldn't say it directly. The apology to Cora was not a transaction. It was a prerequisite. Not for the lease, but for the possibility of something that could eventually look like being a family. I heard the creak of the second-to-top stair. Then Cora appeared in the kitchen doorway. Pajamas, one. Sock hair spectacular from sleep. She took in the room, her mother at the island, her aunt across from her 2 mugs of coffee, the particular quality of quiet that had been in the kitchen a moment before she arrived. She was 8 years old, and she read every bit of it. She looked at Renee. Renee looked at her. Cora said, "Hi, Auntie Renee." Her voice was careful. measured in a way that belonged to the dining room, not the kitchen. I watched her do it the automatic calibration, the old adjustment. Renee said, "Hi, Cora." A beat. Then Renee said, "You look like you slept well." And Cora, because she was Cora, and could not help herself, even when she was trying to be careful, said, "I always sleep well. Mama says I sleep like a person with a clean conscience." I almost smiled. Renee did smile. A real one. A small and surprised the kind that comes before you've decided to have it. "That's a good way to sleep," Renee said. Cora considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. Then she turned to me and said, "Mama, can I have cereal?" I said yes. I got up to get her bowl, and she climbed onto her stool at the island and started telling me about the dream she'd had, which involved a horse and a shopping mall, and her teacher, Miss Patterson, and the dream made no narrative sense. But she told it with full commitment anyway. And the kitchen filled up with her voice, and I let it fill every word of it. And I did not ask her to be quieter or more careful or any smaller version of herself than the one currently describing a horse trying on sneakers in the dream version of the Lenox Square Mall. Renee sat at the other end of the island and listened. I don't know exactly what she was thinking. But she was listening, not with the tolerant half-attention she'd always paid to Cora in family settings, waiting for the child to say something that required correction. She was actually listening the way you listen when you've just been told you've been getting something wrong and you're trying to understand what right looks like. Cora finished the dream and ate her cereal. The morning moved forward the way mornings do, inevitable, ordinary, already becoming what it was going to have been. Derek came downstairs at 9:15, took in the kitchen tableau, and moved very carefully to the coffee maker without saying anything, which was the right instinct. At 9:42, Renee stood up. She said, "Thank you for the coffee, Isla." I said, "Of course." She looked at Cora. "I'd like to come back and talk to you sometime, Cora, if that's okay with you." Cora looked up from her bowl, looked at her aunt for a moment, the full, unfiltered assessment of a child who had not yet learned to hide her evaluations. Then she said, "Okay." Just that, okay. Simple, neither warm nor cold, the answer of an 8-year-old who was willing to wait and see, which was, I thought, exactly the right amount of trust to extend at this particular moment. Renee picked up her purse. She walked to the front door. She paused with her hand on the knob and looked back at me across the length of the entryway. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. She opened the door and stepped out into the Sunday morning, and I stood in my kitchen and watched her walk to her car and get in and sit there again longer this time, almost 4 minutes before she started the engine. Derek appeared beside me. He didn't say anything either. He just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, the two of us, watching his sister's car back out of the driveway. After a moment, he said quietly, "How did it go?" I said. "She found her way to the right place." He was quiet. "She's going to come back to talk to Cora," I said. He nodded slowly. The nod of a man who understood that something had happened in his kitchen this morning that was above his pay grade in the most important possible way. "Isla," he said. I'm sorry." He said it simply without scaffolding. "For not saying something. At the table. I should have. I knew it in the moment, and I know," I said. "That's not enough." "No. But it's a start." He put his arm around my shoulders. I let it stay there. Outside the window, the oak tree was doing nothing except being itself in the October light, which was gold and unhurried and exactly sufficient. From behind us, Cora said, "Daddy, you said you'd take me to the park." Derek said, "I did say that." "You said 10 o'clock. I did say that too. It's almost 10 o'clock. It is almost 10 o'clock. She appeared between us, inserting herself into the space between her parents, the way she'd done since she was small enough to fit entirely, though she was outgrowing it. Now a fact I filed away in the part of me that tracked the passing of things. She looked up at the two of us. "Are you guys having a moment?" Derek said. "We might be." She considered this. "Can you have it in the car? I want to see if the leaves are changing at the park." I said, "Go get your shoes." She went. Derek squeezed my shoulder and went to get his keys. I stood at the window for another moment alone. I thought about the lease file on my laptop, the renewal terms I'd looked at Saturday night, the 12 months I'd already decided to offer the rate adjustment that was fair and nothing more, the phone call I would make to my attorney Monday morning not to reverse anything, because nothing I'd done required reversing, to initiate the next step, which was different from undoing the last one. The correction was not complete. Cora still had a conversation with her aunt to get through on her own terms in her own time. Renee still had to find her way to sitting across from an 8-year-old and saying words that cost something. But we were, for the first time since the birthday dinner, moving in the right direction. Which was, I had always found, the only thing that actually mattered, not where you were, but whether you were moving correctly from where you stood. I turned from the window. Cora was in the doorway with both shoes on the wrong feet, jacket half-zipped, ready to go. I said, "Your shoes are switched." She looked down. "Oh." She kicked them off, switched them, put them back on with the focused determination she brought to every task she undertook, large or small. She looked up. "Better?" I said. She grinned. We went to the park. The first domino fell on a Wednesday, 11 days after Renee sat in my kitchen with both hands around a coffee mug. I didn't push it. That's the thing I want to be clear about. I didn't make a call or send an email or do anything that could be described as engineering what happened next. I had made my decisions, I had set things in motion, and then I had stepped back and allowed the structure of what Renee had built and the structure of what she had done to do what structures do when they've been compromised at the foundation. They settle. Sometimes settling looks like stability. Sometimes it looks like collapse. The difference depends entirely on how sound the original construction was. Renee's had a crack she'd put there herself. What happened on Wednesday started with Marcus. I hadn't expected Marcus to be the one. In 8 years of family gatherings and Sunday dinners and the accumulated geography of a family I had married into, Marcus had existed in my peripheral vision as a pleasant and fundamentally unremarkable presence. A man who refilled water glasses without being asked and laughed at everyone's jokes, and had never, to my knowledge, expressed a strong opinion about anything more consequential than brisket preparation. I had underestimated Marcus. He called me Wednesday morning from a number I recognized this time. His cell, which I had in my phone but had never used to receive a call from. He said, "Isla, it's Marcus. Do you have a few minutes?" I said I did. He said, "I owe you an apology for the dinner." I was sitting right there, and I didn't do anything, and I've had that on me since that night. I said I appreciated him saying so. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I also need to ask you something, and I need you to know that whatever you say, I'm going to respect it. No pressure. No, I'm not calling to negotiate. I just want to understand." I said, "Go ahead." "The lease," he said. "The non-renewal. Renee told me about it when she got home from your place Sunday. All of it, not just the letter, but the whole thing. Who owns the building, how long you've owned it, the whole picture." A pause. "She also told me that you're the one who found the space for her in the first place." I had wondered when that part would surface. It was true. 14 months ago, when Renee had been looking for commercial space for her new business. She had mentioned it at a Sunday dinner offhandedly, the way she mentioned most things as a statement of a problem rather than a request for help. She needed something in a central location, reasonable rate, enough square footage for staging. She'd been looking for 6 weeks, and everything decent was either too expensive or too far. I had said nothing at the table. 2 days later, I had sent her property manager's contact information in a text message, along with the address of Unit 4B, and said there might be an opening coming up, and she should ask about rates. I had not told her the unit was mine. I had not told her I was the reason the previous tenant had been given an early exit incentive. I had simply sent the information and let her follow it. She had signed the lease 3 weeks later. Yes, I said to Marcus. I helped her find it. He absorbed that. So you put her there. I saw an opportunity that fit what she needed. And now you're taking it back. I'm not renewing the lease, I said. Which is different. Is it? Yes. I said it without defensiveness. Putting her there was a choice I made freely without conditions attached. Not renewing is a choice I'm making now, also freely. Neither one obligates the other. Marcus was quiet for a moment. She didn't know you owned it. No. Did you know when you helped her find it that you'd have this that you'd be in this position eventually? It was a good question, an honest one. It deserved an honest answer. No, I said. I helped her find it because it was a good space at a fair rate, and she needed it. I didn't know 14 months ago that I would be making this call. I paused. I didn't know 14 months ago that she would hit my daughter. Silence on his end. I know, he said quietly. I know. Marcus. I said his name the way I said names when I wanted the person to hear what came next clearly. What is it you actually called to ask me? A breath. The account, he said. The lease payments, they come out of our joint account, our household account. I just found out. Renee opened the business using our joint account for the commercial lease without telling me. I thought she had a separate business account. She does now. She opened one 6 months in, but the original lease deposit and the first 4 months of payments came from our joint account. A pause. Without my knowledge. I sat with that. I had not known this. It was not something I had planned for or positioned to use. It was simply a fact that had now entered the room. I'm not telling you this to make her look bad, Marcus said. I'm telling you because I think you should know the full picture of what's actually been happening. And because, he stopped. Because I think I've been standing next to things and not seeing them for a long time. And I'm trying to stop doing that. I thought about Marcus at the birthday dinner. His hand reaching for the water pitcher. The way he'd looked at the table after Renee's hand moved the way everyone had looked, not shocked exactly, but fixed. Held in place by the specific social gravity of, a family that had learned to absorb Renee's corrections without confronting them. Thank you for telling me, I said. Is there anything? He stopped. Started differently. She's scared, Isla, about the business, about what happens next. I've never seen her scared like this before, and Another stop. I don't know what I'm asking. I think I'm asking if there's a path that doesn't end with everything destroyed. I said, there's always a path. Whether it's available depends on what people are willing to do to get there. He said, I understand. We ended the call. I sat for a moment with the new information, the joint account, the months of payments, the marriage-sized blind spot Marcus had apparently been living inside without knowing its dimensions. I felt something for him that was adjacent to sympathy. He was a man in the middle of discovering the shape of his own unawareness, which was a particular and unpleasant kind of reckoning. I knew something about that shape. I had watched Derek discover parts of his own that night in the kitchen. The difference was that Marcus's version had financial architecture attached to it. I called my attorney Thursday morning and told him to prepare the renewal paperwork 12 months, a 7% rate adjustment standard terms. I told him to hold it, not send it. I'd tell him when. He said he'd have it ready. The second domino fell Friday. The family's informal information network, the cousin I'd identified in my mind as the clearinghouse for news that moved sideways through the family rather than directly called Derek Friday afternoon. I only knew this because Derek mentioned it that evening, carefully watching my face while he said it. The cousin, his name was Terrence. He worked in insurance. He had an opinion about everything, and the energy to share it had apparently spent the better part of a phone call informing Derek that the family was talking, that people who had been at Paulette's birthday dinner were now 11 days later finding language for what they'd watched and hadn't responded to, that the silence at the table, which had felt like neutrality in the moment, was being recognized retroactively for what it was. What did Terrence say exactly? I asked. Derek said, he said he's been thinking about it since that night, and he's been ashamed of himself, and that he thinks most of the people at that table feel the same way. I looked at Derek. He also said. Derek paused. He said Cora deserved better than what she got from all of them, including him. I looked at the table for a moment. At the grain of the wood and the small ring from a coffee cup someone had set down without a coaster 2 years ago that hadn't come out no matter what I tried. Terrence said that, I said. He did. Huh. I picked up my fork. I've underestimated Terrence. Derek almost smiled. The third domino was the one I hadn't expected, which was the one that hit the hardest. Paulette called Saturday morning. Not the family manager version, not the version checking in about the lease. The third version, the one that came without diplomacy. She said, I've been thinking about what you said, about Cora making herself smaller. I said, okay. I've seen it, she said. I've been seeing it for years, and I called it something else. I called it Cora learning manners, getting comfortable in adult spaces, growing up. A long pause. I was wrong about what I was seeing. I didn't say anything. I want to talk to Cora, Paulette said. Not about what happened. Not about Renee. Just, I want to talk to my granddaughter. I want her to know that my house is a place where she is allowed to be loud. Something moved through me that I hadn't expected. Not vindication, not satisfaction. Something quieter and more complicated, the feeling of watching a woman who loved my daughter find her way to showing it correctly. The particular relief of that. I think Cora would like that, I said. Good. Paulette's voice was back to its warmest register. I'll call her myself, if that's okay. That's okay. Isla. A pause. You did what I should have done. A long time before it got to where it got. I said, you're doing it now. That's very generous of you. It's accurate, I said. Generous would be pretending there's no difference. She was quiet, then fair. We said goodbye. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee and felt the morning arrange itself around me, the particular Saturday quality of time, moving at a different pace, the house still drowsy with sleep, the oak tree visible through the window, losing the last of its October leaves. Cora came downstairs at 9:47. She poured herself orange juice, spilling slightly and wiping it up without being asked, because she was 8 and imperfect and learning and entirely herself. She sat down across from me. She said, Mama Auntie Renee texted Daddy and asked if she could come see me. I looked at her. How do you know that? I saw it on his phone when he left it on the counter. A pause. I wasn't snooping. It was right there. Mm-hmm. She looked at her orange juice, then at me. Do I have to? No, I said. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. She thought about this with the seriousness she brought to important questions. "But you think I should," she said. I looked at my daughter, her deep brown skin in the morning light, the sleep still at the corners of her eyes, the 2 puff buns she'd somehow managed to put in herself before coming downstairs, slightly uneven, but entirely intentional. "I think," I said carefully, "that your aunt did something wrong and she knows it. And I think she wants to tell you so herself. And I think you are old enough to decide whether you want to hear it." Cora was quiet for a moment. "What if she says something dumb?" she asked. "Then you tell me and I handle it." She considered. "What if she cries?" "Then she cries." "I don't really like when adults cry," Cora said. "It makes me feel like I'm supposed to fix it." "You're not supposed to fix it. Her feelings are hers to manage." Another pause. She drank her orange juice. "Okay," she said finally. "She can come." Then she put her glass down and said, "Can we have pancakes?" I got up and got the mix from the cabinet. The kitchen filled with the ordinary sounds of a Saturday morning, the whisk against the bowl, the pan heating Cora, narrating something from the stool at the island, the particular domestic music of a house that had weathered something and was still standing. Still standing and entirely itself. Which was, I had come to understand, the only outcome that had ever mattered. Not Renee's suffering. I had never wanted that. Not the destruction of her business or her marriage, or her standing in the family. What I had wanted was for the cost of what she'd done to be real enough that she could not simply smooth her dress and move past it. For the accounting to be specific and personal and impossible to perform her way around. I had wanted her to arrive somewhere she hadn't planned to go. She was arriving. The pancakes were ready. Cora ate 4 of them, which was too many and exactly right, and I did not say a word about it. Renee came on a Tuesday. Not a Sunday this time, not a family-adjacent day, with the weight of tradition attached to it. A Tuesday afternoon in early November, when the light came in low and gold through the front windows, and the neighborhood was quiet the way it gets on weekday afternoons when the school buses haven't run yet, and the streets belong to no one in particular. Derek took the afternoon off work. Not to be present for the conversation, I had been clear about that, and he had understood, but to be in the house, available at the edges. The way he'd learned over these past weeks, to position himself close enough to matter far enough to let things happen the way they needed to. He was in the garage when Renee arrived, working on something that didn't need working on, staying busy in the way men stay busy when they're actually just staying. I opened the door. Renee was wearing the pearl earrings. I had wondered if she would. I had thought about it actually, whether she would choose them or leave them, whether she understood that I tracked such things. She was wearing them, and I decided that was right. They were hers. They had been her mother's. Whatever Vivian Washington had been, whatever she had handed down. That Renee was still in the process of identifying and examining and deciding what to do with the earrings were not the problem. The earrings were just earrings. "She's in the backyard," I said. Renee nodded. I led her through the house, through the kitchen where the lunch dishes were still drying on the rack because I had decided this afternoon did not require a performance of domestic perfection. Through the back door, which I held open. Cora was at the oak tree. Sitting on the low branch she'd claimed as hers, feet dangling, a book open in her lap that she wasn't reading because she'd heard the door and looked up. She looked at her aunt. Renee looked at her. I said, "I'll be inside." I went back through the door. I did not hover near the window. I went to the kitchen table and sat down with my own cup of tea and a folder of documents I needed to review, and I read them genuinely because eavesdropping on this conversation was not something I was willing to do. What happened in the backyard between Renee and Cora belonged to both of them in a way it did not belong to me. I had said what I needed to say to Renee in my kitchen 10 days ago. The rest was hers to do. I reviewed 3 lease documents and made notes in the margins, and drank my tea, and did not watch the clock, which was harder than reviewing the documents. 22 minutes later, the back door opened. I heard 2 sets of footsteps, Cora's quick, light ones, Renee's measured ones behind her. Cora appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was carrying her book. Her expression was the careful, neutral one she used when she was processing something and hadn't decided what to do with it yet. She looked at me. I said, "You okay?" She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Yeah," she said. Then, "I'm gonna go read in my room. Okay?" She went upstairs. Her footsteps crossed the ceiling above me, moved to her room, and settled. Renee stood in the kitchen. She had her purse over her shoulder and her keys in her hand, the posture of someone who hadn't planned to stay but wasn't entirely sure how to leave. Her eyes were dry. Whatever had happened in the backyard, she had held herself together through it. I respected that. Not because crying would have been wrong, but because I suspected she had chosen not to, for Cora's sake. Because Cora had told me she didn't like when adults cried, and it made her feel responsible, and either Renee had intuited that, or she had simply found her way to the right instinct for once. "How did it go?" I said. "I told her I was wrong," Renee said. "I told her what I did was wrong and that she didn't deserve it, and that it was never going to happen again." She paused. I didn't explain. I didn't give her the history, the reasons, any of that. I just told her it was wrong, and I was sorry. What did she say? Renee was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her face, something soft, and surprised the expression of a person who has received an unexpected grace. She said, "Okay," Renee said. And then she asked me if I wanted to see the caterpillar she found. I looked at my cup of tea. "There was a caterpillar," Renee said a little helplessly. "In a jar, on the fence post. She's been watching it for a week, apparently." She told me the whole situation with the caterpillar. I pressed my lips together. Renee stopped, started differently. "She's something, Isla. She really is." "I know," I said. Renee stood there for another moment. Then she said, "I know you have the renewal ready. I'm not asking about it. I want you to know that whatever you decide, I understand. Either way, I understand." I looked at her. She meant it. That was the thing, she genuinely meant it. And the meaning of it came from the same place as the wet eyes in my kitchen 10 days ago, the 2 minutes sitting in the car before she knocked on my door, the 22 minutes in the backyard with my daughter and the caterpillar. She had arrived somewhere real. The destination wasn't comfortable, but she was there. I said, "I'll have Harris send over the paperwork this week." She went still. The renewal. 12 months. 7% rate adjustment, standard terms. She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved through her face that I didn't try to catalog. It was too many things at once, and it was hers. "Why?" she said. It wasn't a strategic question. It wasn't suspicion. It was genuine. The question of a woman trying to understand something that didn't fit the shape of what she thought she deserved. I said, "Because your business being viable is better for the family than your business failing. Because Marcus doesn't deserve to absorb the financial consequences of something he didn't do. And because," I paused, "because Cora is going to grow up in a family that includes you. And I would rather that family be functional than not." Renee was quiet. "That doesn't mean we're past it," I said. "We're not. What happened at that table is going to take longer than a Tuesday afternoon to work through, and I think we both know that." I looked at her directly. "But we're moving, and moving is enough for now." She nodded. She nodded the way she'd nodded in my kitchen when she said okay to sitting across from Cora with no audience and no script, like a woman who understood that the gesture was the first step of something longer and more demanding than the gesture itself. At the door, she turned back. She said, "I'm going to do better. With her, I mean that." I said, "I know you do." She left. I stood at the door for a moment and then went to call my attorney. The afternoon moved forward. I sent 2 emails, returned a call about Unit 2A that needed a maintenance issue resolved, started dinner because it was nearly 4 and Derek would be hungry, and Cora always claimed she wasn't, and then ate more than anyone. At 5:15, Paulette called. I answered, and she said, "Is this a good time?" I said it was. She said she'd spoken to Terrence, that Terrence had spoken to the 3 other cousins who had been at the dinner, and that all of them without coordination apparently, which surprised me less than it surprised Paulette had separately reached out to Derek in the past week to say some version of the same thing. They had been wrong to say nothing. They had known it was wrong in the moment. They were saying so now because it was late, but it was still true. "I wanted you to know," Paulette said, "that the people in that room are accounting for themselves, even if it took them longer than it should have." I said, "Thank you for telling me." "I also want to know," she said, and her voice shifted into something more careful, "if I can take Cora to lunch next Saturday, just the 2 of us, to that place she likes on Peachtree with the biscuits." I said, "Ask her yourself. Her number is the same." A pause. Then warmly, "You're right. I'll call her." I heard the smile in her voice when she said it. We said goodbye. I put the phone down and stood in the kitchen with the garlic I'd been about to mince and thought about the shape of what had happened over the past 3 weeks. Not the clean narrative version I might tell later with its clear arc and legible meaning, but the actual texture of it. The late-night email and the certified letter and the parking garage and Philip Chen's voicemail and Marcus's call and Terrence and the cousins and Paulette at the table looking away. And then Paulette on the phone saying, "Call her yourself." The texture was not clean. It was human-sized, which meant it was complicated and partial and still in progress. There were people in that family who had sat at that table and said nothing, and would carry that with them in ways I wasn't privy to and couldn't control. There was a marriage, Renee and Marcus's, that was working through something that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with a joint account and a secret and the ordinary intimacy failures of 2 people who had stopped looking at each other carefully. There was Derek, who had frozen and then thawed and was still some mornings sitting with what it cost him that he'd let those few seconds pass. There was Cora, who had shown an ant her caterpillar after receiving an apology, which was either the purest form of grace or the most efficient way to change a subject, and with Cora, it was genuinely difficult to tell the difference. And there was Renee, arriving somewhere she hadn't planned to go, paying a cost she hadn't expected to pay, and doing it without collapsing entirely, which was its own form of credit. The garlic needed mincing. I minced it. The kitchen filled with the smell, and I heard Cora upstairs shifting into the particular restlessness that meant she'd been reading long enough, and was about to appear in the kitchen with opinions about dinner, which she did 4 minutes later, appearing in the doorway in socks and an expression of deep investment. "What's for dinner?" she asked. "Pasta." "What kind?" "The kind with garlic and olive oil." She considered this. "Can we have the bread too?" "Yes. The good bread or the regular bread?" "The good bread." She nodded satisfied and climbed onto the stool at the island. She put her elbows on the counter chin in her hands and watched me cook with the focused attention she gave to things she found genuinely interesting. After a while, she said, "Mama." Auntie Renee said she was wrong." I kept my eyes on the pan. "I know." She didn't try to explain it or anything. She just said she was wrong. "How did that feel?" Cora thought about it. The genuine kind of thinking, not the performed consideration, she sometimes offered adults when she sensed they needed an answer more than they needed the truth. Like she meant it, she said. People usually say a lot of words when they're sorry. She didn't say a lot of words. Sometimes the fewer words, the more they mean, I said. Cora was quiet for a moment. Then, I showed her the caterpillar. I heard. She actually looked at it. Some adults just say, "Oh, that's nice," and look somewhere else. She actually looked. I stirred the pasta. That was good of her. Yeah. A pause. I think she's going to be better. I looked at my daughter then. At her face in the kitchen light, 8 years old, certain about things in the way that only children and very old people are permitted to be certain, which was to say completely and without embarrassment. Yeah, I said. Yeah, she said. I can tell. I turned back to the stove. I thought about all the things I could say to that, about how healing was not linear, how people repeated their patterns, how one Tuesday afternoon with a caterpillar was not a transformation, just a beginning. I thought about all of that, and I said none of it, because Cora was 8 years old, and she had sat on her tree branch and received an apology and chosen to show her aunt a caterpillar. And that choice was hers, and it was enormous, and it was right. And the last thing it needed was my adult varnish applied over the top of it. Set the table, I said instead. She slid off the stool. 3 or 4, she asked. 4. Dad's inside. She got the plates. The kitchen filled with the sound of her doing it. The plates coming down from the cabinet, she still had to stand on her toes to reach the silverware sorted with more noise than necessary. The particular music of an 8-year-old, setting a table in a house where she had never once been asked to be smaller than herself. I finished the pasta. I called everyone to dinner. We ate. 3 weeks after Renee sat on her heels in my backyard and looked at a caterpillar in a jar, Cora asked me if we could go back to Grandma Paulette's for Sunday dinner. Not because she'd been asked. Not because Derek had suggested it or I had maneuvered toward it. She came downstairs on a Thursday morning with her shoes on the wrong feet again and her backpack half-zipped and said between bites of toast, "Can we go to Grandma's this Sunday?" She said she'd make the cornbread. I said, "She called you." "Last week. We talked for a long time." "What did you talk about?" Cora considered. She told me about when Daddy was little and broke a window with a baseball and tried to blame it on a bird. A pause. Daddy is a bad liar. He is, I agreed. She also said her house is a place where I can be loud. Cora said it matter-of-factly, the way she reported facts she'd already integrated, not as something surprising or noteworthy, just as information that was now part of her understanding of the world. She said she should have said it a long time ago. I looked at my daughter. "Can we go?" she said. I said, "Yes, we can go." She zipped her backpack and went to school. I sat at the kitchen table for a while, after the door closed with a quiet. And my coffee, and the particular feeling of something completing itself, not dramatically, not with any of the ceremony the preceding weeks might have seemed to call for, but in the most ordinary way possible. A child asking for cornbread. A grandmother who had called and told her the truth. The unremarkable machinery of people deciding to do better. This is what repair looks like, I thought. Not a moment. A series of small, ordinary choices that accumulate into something you can eventually call a direction. Sunday came. We arrived at Paulette's at noon. The house smelled like it always did, brown sugar and something savory, the oven that had been running since morning. Paulette opened the door before Derek could knock, and pulled Cora into a hug that was longer than any hug I'd seen her give at a family gathering, the kind that doesn't count time. Cora let herself be hugged. Fully without the careful held-in quality she'd had in this house for years, the hug of a child who has been told she is welcome and believes it. Paulette looked at me over Cora's head. I nodded. She nodded back. We went inside. It was a smaller gathering than the birthday dinner, just us, Terrence and his wife, one of Derek's aunts, who drove in from Marietta, and Paulette. Renee was not there. That was not by my design. She had told Derek she thought it was right to give Cora some time in that house, without the added complexity, and I thought that was correct. And the fact that she had thought it was correct, without being prompted, mattered to me in a quiet way I didn't make a production of. The afternoon was easy. Genuinely easy, which is different from the performed ease of family gatherings, where everyone has agreed not to mention the thing. Nobody mentioned anything. There was nothing to perform around, because the thing that had been in the room for years, the thing that had been there before the birthday dinner and before the tat, and before any of us had named it, had been addressed. Not resolved entirely, not packaged cleanly, but addressed. It was in the past now, in a way it hadn't been before. Terrence made a point of sitting next to Cora at lunch. He was the cousin who had called Derek and said he was ashamed of himself, and whatever internal accounting he'd been doing since the birthday dinner appeared to have landed him somewhere that looked like determination. He asked Cora about soccer with genuine attention. He let her correct him 3 times about the rules. He laughed with the particular surprised laugh of a man discovering that an 8-year-old has strong opinions about offside calls and is not wrong about them. Cora bloomed. I watched it happen from across the table and felt something in my chest go loose and easy. She was at full volume. Full gesture, full Cora narrating, correcting, laughing at her own jokes a half-second before she delivered the punchline, because she'd always done that and I had always loved it. She asked Paulette's opinion on something and leaned forward when Paulette answered and pushed back when she disagreed politely but genuinely. And Paulette received it with the warmth of a woman who had decided that her granddaughter's opinions were worth having in the room. It was in every exterior sense an ordinary Sunday lunch. Which was exactly what it was supposed to be. Derek caught my eye across the table at one point. He had the expression he got sometimes, the one I didn't have a name for, but recognized as the face he made when he was feeling something too large for the moment's container. He looked at Cora, looked back at me, pressed his lips together in the way that meant he was holding something in that he'd say later, in the car or in bed, in the private language of a marriage that had been tested in the past month and had held. I looked at him for a moment. Then I reached across and put my hand over his on the table. He turned his hand over and held mine. That was all. We kept eating. After lunch, Cora went into the backyard with Derek's aunt to look at the garden, which meant Derek's aunt would do the looking and Cora would do the narrating, which was how Cora experienced most of the natural world. Terrence helped Paulette clear the table. Derek refilled coffee. The afternoon settled into the comfortable, unhurried pace of a meal that has been good enough to deserve a slow ending. I was in the kitchen helping Paulette with the dishes when she said quietly, "She's different today." I said, "She's herself." Paulette looked out the window at Cora in the garden, gesturing at something with the authority of someone who has identified a significant botanical discovery. "I've been watching her in this house for 8 years, Paulette said. I told myself what I was seeing was a child growing up, learning to be in adult spaces. She paused. I knew that wasn't all of it. I think I knew for a long time. I rinsed a plate. "Today she's herself," Paulette said again, like she was learning the sentence by saying it twice. "She's always been herself," I said. "She just didn't always feel like she could be here." Paulette received that. She dried the plate I handed her slowly, her hands working by habit while her mind was somewhere else. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay. Would you have told me if it hadn't gotten to the dinner? Would you ever have said something to me about what you were seeing?" I thought about it honestly because she deserved that. "I don't know," I said. I'd been watching it for years and not saying anything. I kept telling myself I was choosing my moments. I paused. I think the truth is, I wasn't sure you'd see it, and I didn't want to put the weight of it on a relationship I valued. I would have seen it, Paulette said quietly, if you'd shown me where to look. Maybe, I said. I think you're right, and I think I should have tried. We stood there in the kitchen with the dishes and the ordinary weight of that acknowledgement. The thing I had held for years out of a combination of protection and uncertainty and the particular loneliness of watching something happen that no one else seemed to see. We both have things to do differently, Paulette said finally. Yes, I said. We do. She handed me the next dish to rinse. We finished the dishes. On the drive home, Cora fell asleep in the back seat 20 minutes out, which was exactly what she'd done on the drive home from the birthday dinner 6 weeks ago. The parallel was not lost on me. Same back seat, same 20 minutes, same sleeping child, and everything else entirely different. Derek drove. I looked out the passenger window at the Atlanta evening coming in the November light, going early the way it does the city rearranging itself in the dark. He said, "Good afternoon." "Yes," I said. "She was so—" He stopped. "She was just herself in there." "I know. I can't believe I didn't see." He stopped again. This was the version of the sentence he'd been starting and stopping for 6 weeks. He had said it in varying forms a number of times, and had never quite finished it to his own satisfaction. "You saw it eventually," I said. "That's what matters." "It shouldn't have taken— Derek." I said his name the way I always said it, when I needed him to stop going around the same corner. "I know. You know. We're not going to stop knowing it, but we're not going to keep circling it either. We've been somewhere hard, and we came through it, and Cora is asleep in the back seat, and your mother told my daughter that her house is a place where she can be loud." I looked at him. "That's where we are now. That's enough." He was quiet for a moment. "You're the most—" He shook his head slightly. "I don't have the word for what you are." "Efficient," I offered. He laughed. Actually laughed the full one that came from somewhere unguarded, the laugh I'd fallen in love with at a cookout in Decatur over a brisket argument 11 years ago. I smiled. The car was quiet after that, the good kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. From the back seat, without opening her eyes, Cora said, "I'm not asleep." Derek said, "We know. I was just resting." "Okay." Terrence said he'd come to one of my games. He did say that. I'm going to hold him to it. I know you will. A pause. The sound of her settling deeper into the seat. "Grandma Paulette makes the best cornbread," she said. "She does," I said. "Better than anyone." "Don't tell her I agree," Derek said. "Why not?" "She'll never let me forget it." Cora was quiet for a moment. Then, "She told me she loves me today. She says it every time, but today it sounded different." Neither Derek nor I said anything. "Like she meant it extra," Cora said. "Is that a thing? Can you mean something extra?" I looked out the window at the evening. "Yes," I said. "That's a thing." She was asleep, actually asleep this time before we reached the highway. I thought about what she'd said, about meaning something extra, about the way a sentence you've said 100 times can suddenly land with its full weight, as if the repetition had been preparing the ground for the moment when the words finally reach the depth they were always intended for. "I love you," said at the door of a child's room at the end of a phone call across a lunch table in November. And then one day said in a way that sounds different, that lands differently, that the child can feel is something more than habit. I love you extra. I thought about the past 6 weeks. about an email sent at 11:47 at night, and a certified letter and a phone call in a parking garage, and Renee in my kitchen with both hands around a mug, and Cora on a tree branch with a caterpillar in a jar. About Paulette saying she should have said it a long time ago, and Marcus saying he'd been standing next to things he wasn't seeing, and Terrence saying he was ashamed of himself, and Derek's hand turning over under mine at the lunch table. About the lease document I had signed and sent to my attorney Monday morning, which would arrive at Renee's occasions later this week as a piece of paper she hadn't expected, with typed terms that were fair and a duration that was sufficient inside an envelope that would require no ceremony to open. About the fact that I had never wanted destruction. I had wanted accounting. I had wanted the cost to be real. I had wanted Renee to arrive somewhere she hadn't planned to go and find when she got there that the path forward required her to be different in a way she couldn't perform. And I had wanted underneath all of it what I had always wanted, and had sometimes lost patience waiting for my daughter to be fully herself in every room she walked into, including the ones that had made her small, including those. We pulled into the driveway. Derek turned off the engine. We sat for a moment in the quiet driveway, dark, the three of us. Derek in front, Cora asleep behind, and me between the two people I had built my life around, in the house I had chosen deliberately, in the city I had come to at 26 with a duffel bag and a laptop and $4,300, and the knowledge that the people who owned the buildings were never the ones who looked most important in the room. They were the ones who stayed quiet and let everyone else talk. And then when it mattered, said exactly what needed to be said. No more, no less. Derek turned to me. "You ready?" I looked at our house, at the lit window in the front where we'd left a lamp on, because I always left a lamp on when we went somewhere in the evening, a habit from living alone years ago that I'd never shed and had never wanted to. A house with a light left on. A child asleep in the back seat. A husband who had frozen once and thawed and would not freeze again. A family that was still imperfectly and persistently becoming what it was supposed to be. I said, yes. We got out of the car. Derek lifted Cora from the back seat without waking her, the practiced ease of a father who had been doing this since she was an infant, her head against his shoulder beads clicking faintly in her puffs. I unlocked the front door. I held it open. They went inside. I stood on the front step for a moment in the November evening, in the particular cold that arrives once October has fully surrendered. And I looked at the street and the oak trees lining it, losing their last leaves. And I felt in that moment the complete and ordinary satisfaction of a woman who has moved correctly from where she stood. Not loudly, not for an audience, just correctly. Then I went inside and closed the door behind me. There are women who will tell you patience is passive. That waiting is the same as doing nothing. That if you don't respond immediately loudly in the moment, you've let something go. I want to tell you something different. The most powerful thing I have ever done was sit in a car driving home from a birthday dinner and think clearly. Was send an email at 11:47 at night in complete silence. Was make coffee for a woman in my kitchen and let her find her own way to the truth rather than hand it to her. The most powerful thing I have ever done was know what I owned and when to use it. You don't always need to fight loudly to win completely. Sometimes you need to know exactly what you're standing on, exactly what belongs to you, and exactly what the cost of what someone did is going to be. And then you make the decisions that reflect that knowledge quietly and precisely and without apology. And I'm not telling you to be cold. I'm not telling you to be hard. I am telling you that there is a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself in the moment, that operates in the days and weeks after the moment, that is patient enough to let the right outcome arrive rather than grabbing for the satisfying one. I am telling you that my daughter went back to her grandmother's house on a Sunday and ate cornbread at full volume and pushed back on Paulette's opinions and showed Terrence everything that was wrong with his understanding of offside calls. And nobody asked her to be quieter. And nobody suggested she needed to learn her place. And she came home and said Grandma Paulette's cornbread was the best, and fell asleep in the car the way children fall asleep when the day has been exactly what a day should be. That's the outcome I was building toward. Every quiet decision, every patient step, every moment I chose outcome over satisfaction. That Sunday afternoon, that sleeping child, that lamp left on in the window. If this story reminded you of something you've been holding a wrong that hasn't been accounted for, a room where you've been making yourself smaller than you are, I hope you find your version of what I found. Not the anger, the clarity underneath it, the knowing what you own, and the patience to let it be enough. Drop a comment below and tell me what's one room in your life where you've been smaller than you should be. I rate every single one. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe. There are more of them. There are always more.